So tomorrow's Memorial Day. We should worship God and good men and good women day. That's what I think it should be. Memorial Day is a significant holiday for the world, not just Americans. And by the way, I'll show you, many people, nations all over the world are celebrating American Memorial Day. Did you know that? Divine Principle explains that the fall of man took place at the time of immaturity of Adam and Eve. They're the prototype humans. They fell in an immature state and were unable to grow. Immature children are selfish. Immature children are selfish. People who grow up to be biologically adults but spiritually immature are still selfish. For example, even our own kids fight over the same toy. If you didn't have more than one kid, we had 4 kids, and so they would sometimes fight over the same toy, right? Humans have an emotional immaturity that causes them to be jealous of possessions, positions, blessings of others. Causes them to be jealous. We call this a fallen nature. That when we become jealous, instead of saying congratulations, what we really mean is I wish I had your blessing, right? That's the whole problem, even exists today, right? So we also believe in an evil spirit world that invites evil actions, murder, slavery, theft, rape, lack of love. Yes, we believe in evil spirits that invade humans and encourage the above crimes. So if we allow ourselves our immature feelings of jealousy or hatred or racism or any of those things, Satan, evil spirits will work on us to actually accomplish those evil deeds in our lives. So, Consummation of Human History, page 101 says, all creation was created to be the object of God's joy. However, man, as has been clarified in the principle of creation, was created to be the substantial object of God, returning joy to him through the action of his own free will. So free will is one of the most important elements here. Therefore, man cannot become the object of God's joy without our own free will making us the object of God's joy. Unless he knows God's will. That's what this whole sermon will be about, you'll see. And lives according to it by his own effort. God can't make you love your neighbor. God can't make you love God. Can't make you be a good husband or a good wife or a good parent. You have to be willing to do it by your own free will and effort, right? Consequently, man was created in such a way that he could know God's will and live by it forever, experiencing God's heart and zeal as his son, right? Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that your life, trying hard to be a good wife, trying hard to be a good husband, trying hard to be a good child of God? Human settlement in Egypt dates back to at least 40,000 BC with the Atarian tool manufacturing. Ancient Egyptian civilization coalesced around 3150 BC with the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh of the first dynasty, Narmer. Predominantly native Egyptian rule lasted until the conquering of Egypt by the Achaemenid Persian Empire in the 6th century BC. So most people, I know there's other Sumerian groups, most historians, anthropologists considered Egypt to be the first real nation with writing, mathematics, technology, and that's the last one. I know there's Göbekli, but there's no writing. They didn't have any writing. So here's the trouble. A sophisticated and technologically advanced urban culture developed in the mature Harappan period from 2600 to 1900 BC. Written records of the history of China can be found from as early as 1500 BC under the Shang dynasty. So these are the first nations of the world. The beginning of writing, the beginning of technology, the beginning of mathematics. This is the tragedy. While there had been slaves in Egypt since the beginning of its history, the numbers of slaves greatly increased during the New Kingdom when the pharaohs were committed to a policy of foreign involvement and conquests in Nubia, Canaan, and Syria, brought in many prisoners of war, Seker Ankh, who were enslaved at times, branded with the sign Kai. I gave them to them captains of archers and chief men of the tribes, branded and made them into slaves, impressed with by name, their wives and their children were made likewise. So during the campaigns of Thutmose III, prisoners of war were taken as slaves, part of the tribute paid paid by the defeated, right? So this is actually the written record of the original human history of mankind. What Divine Principle says is the reason the Egyptians could go to war and make all other people their slaves was because this fallen nature, what we call Cain-like nature, inhabits human beings. The only way to get rid of it is by our own free will and effort. Right? So if you look at the ancient Egyptian writings and pictures, it's about slavery. It's about enslaving, torturing, killing people. So because responsibility of freedom and liberty and self-autonomy, God is not free to protect us from enemies without a foundation on a personal, family, national, and world level of faith and substance. That's what happens to the Jews, to the Christians. Even though they're trying hard, without a successful foundation of faith and substance, God can't protect us. And let me explain how that works. For example, although Sodom and Gomorrah were full of evil, if God or Abraham could have found a foundation of faith and substance of at least 10 righteous, the cities could be saved. Even all those crazy, who were they, Sodomites and Gomorrahites, could be saved if there was a foundation of societal faith of at least 10 righteous people. Right? Oh, that's all. Unfortunately, they could not be found. But how about this? Although based on a foundation of faith and substance on the family level, Lot's family could be saved and were saved. See, that's how. People don't understand this, the foundation of faith and substance. So why doesn't God work? Why doesn't he just save everybody? Because human responsibility is we must lay a foundation of faith and substance. There was no one, of course, to protect Abel from the jealousy of Cain. Although there were 12 apostles, Jesus needed just 3, Peter, James, and John, to pray with him for 1 hour, and he could have escaped crucifixion. If there was a foundation of faith and substance of the 1 hour of prayer, then the whole history of human beings would have changed. Right? Isn't that amazing? However, there was no foundation. They all fell asleep, and we know history. Right? Therefore, prayers of the faithful are more important than we think. Our foundation of faith and our foundation of substance, loving others. For me personally, that's why I went to Korea. Because I believe strongly, even though I don't understand everything, I believe strongly this foundation of faith to serve true parents on earth right now, whether I understand the providence or not, is significant, important. So therefore, for example, we prayed for a safe entrance to the Chunwon-gung, right? And what happened? A safe entrance took place because we all went out of faith and substance to love and attend True Mother. It was safe. There was no hiccups. Even all the buses worked, right? Even the buses worked, amazingly. So I say thank you for your prayers and acts of righteousness that made Mother's goal successful. And that's got to be significant in world history, right? Our next big prayer point should be inviting young people to hear the truth of God's dream and hope of the kingdom of heaven on earth. That's our next prayer goal. That's what we should be praying for. Okay, so this is important in relationship to world peace. Men lost their original value because of the fall. In the present age, however, the democratic ideology has reached its culmination, and men had come to pursue the original value of individuality endowed at the creation. So men's conscience is awakening, right? Human beings' conscience. This may be seen in the liberation of slaves, liberation of minority groups, liberation of the minor powers, together with the demand for human dignity, equality between sexes, and equality amongst all people, right? Isn't that happening in the 20th century? At the end of the 20th century, these things took place. And I'll show you the numbers. For example, we say all these things are taking place. The rise of Christianity and acts of faith and substance by Christian nations placed them in a position to protect themselves from the attacks of the satanic forces during World War I and World War II. And here's what they did. Let me show you. For example, the British abolished the Atlantic slave trade from 1807. They said, no, we're a Christian nation. We can't enslave other people, right? American soldiers had ended slavery in the USA by 1865. They said, we're a Christian nation, we can't have slavery in our country. Women won the right to vote in 1926. American men and women said, no, women are equal to men and absolutely need the right to vote to make equal laws that are equal for both men and women. Isn't that true? That actually took place. It's historical. American Indians, who were considered savages before, killed on sight until 1926 in California, became naturalized citizens automatically. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
My ancestors are very happy. These are tremendous acts of faith and substantial love of God's children on the earth that any history book will show you is absolutely true. Undoubtedly based upon the prayers and righteous acts of Christians, Quakers, Methodists, Catholics, all kinds of different groups of people. So, what does that mean? The horror of the Christian world in 1939 to the horror of the Christian world in 1939, Nazi Germany in Europe, Japan and Asia, Korea, Formosa, who is now called Taiwan, Singapore, China, Nanking, and Italy and North Africa had recreated slavery in the world, and not just to Jews, but Christians, Slavs, Poles, Russians, French. Did God hear the prayers of those people and send somebody to save them? Yeah, based on these foundations of faith. The European and American nations had ended slavery, but Nazis in Germany recreated slavery, right? There's a new slave. They call them slave labor camps, right? Here's both women and men. Jews, Poles, everybody was in those slave labor camps. It's not just the Jews. It was everybody they wanted to kill, right? And who did God send? The soldiers and patriots of the United States of America. I love America. My family were Indians, and they were saved by Americans, right? So we say World War II, Satan develops totalitarianism to destroy the foundation to receive the Lord of the Second Advent in Korea by war, murder, and enslavement. Read Mother's biography. That's what she said. Read Father's biography. That's what happened. Although there was a Pyongyang resurrection, right? The Pyongyang Pentecost from 1907 to 1947. By 47, the Japanese and Korean communists had destroyed that foundation. So Father could never find his John the Baptist. Mother could never find the John the Baptist. They were all killed, right? So, based upon jealousy of other nations, racial hatred of Jews, Hitler, Tojo, Mussolini, just as Cain attacked Abel, Satan hates humanity. Nazi Germany killed 6 million Jews, killed 6 million Polish, Slavs, Christian clergy, and at least 25 million Russians. And that's not counting French, the Dutch, all the other people that were killed. Japan attacked with the goal of enslaving Koreans, Chinese, Filipinos, and the world estimated to have killed 30 million Asians during World War II. Right? If you read about the rape of Nanking or other things, you think actually 30 million is a small number, right? 85 millions of people approximately were killed during World War II, right? And it would have been more. The point is, it would have been more if the United States had not entered the war on the side of the Allies. The cruelty and hatred of Satan was released worldwide. How many more if the USA had not stepped in? It would not have stopped. There was no power that could stop Japan or Germany in those days. There was no power. Only the USA. So what are we supposed to do? Defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy. Tomorrow's Memorial Day, when we remember all those Americans who died doing exactly that. This is about Frank Towers and saving the Jews. How did the European Jews feel about American soldiers after World War II or during World War II? If you were living in Greece or Rome or you were a country next to them and you heard the Greek army is coming, would you think they were coming to save you or enslave you? No, Greeks didn't save anybody. They enslaved everybody. Romans didn't save anybody. If you were in France or Germany or Spain and you heard the Rome or Israel, and you heard the Roman armies coming, what would you think? They're coming to kill the heck out of us. They're going to murder us, crucify us. They'd be terrified, right? But it changed during this time. Frank Towers, 96, figures hundreds of Bergen-Belsen inmates rescued by his army unit aboard a train headed to the Theresienstadt are still alive. The one-time lieutenant is making a dogged search to find them. Army's 30th Infantry Division returned for a reunion that brought the story back. It involved a train shuffling 2,500 Jews from one death camp to another as the Nazis tried to hide their crimes. What happened? Lucky for 5-year-old Dutch Jew John Fransman and the other riders of the liberation train, the U.S. Army showed up a few hours later. When the Jews on the train saw the American Army, did they think, oh no, the Germans are killing us, now the Americans are killing us? No! They thought, we're saved. The American military will save us from the Nazis. He remembers his mother's body language changing when the soldiers came into view. It was transmitted that this was good, that we were being rescued, said Fransman, now 64, living in Youngman. So the nature of human beings to see the American military was, we're saved. For decades, the tale of the liberation train was forgotten chapter of World War II, but Friday in North Charleston, surviving members of the group all reunited. Most of the U.S. troops who were there for the train rescue near Magdeburg, northeastern Germany, have died, but 7 of the train's riders, who in 1945 were teens and children assigned to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, have come from all over the world to reunite with the American soldiers who saved their lives. Most of the soldiers were dead, only a few alive. What was the view of Jews toward the American army during this time? This is Ariella Rojic, 75. They were our angels, she said. A train rider who emigrated to Canada after the war, she remembers the strange looks on the faces of war-hardened GIs who weren't used to seeing atrocities against civilians. She said they weren't prepared. So these tough soldiers saw what the Germans were doing to the Jews, and even they cried. Even they were sick, right? Even General Patton said he vomited seeing the Holocaust prisons. One American who remembers the refugees was Frank Towers, a 26-year-old Army lieutenant whose job included rounding up dozens of trucks and finding beds for the survivors in nearby. What was the Army doing? They were finding beds. They were finding food. They're getting trucks for these people, right? So this is the reunion. These are the children of the Jews that they saved, right? And they said they loved him. This birthday wish goes with a heavy heart because the loved, respected, and admired by all of us liberator Frank Towers, the last living liberator of those whom we met at a 2009 symposium, has left us. While he is not with us anymore, the memory and gratefulness for him in the U.S. Army and all other angels of our life remain with us to the end of our lives, and with our children who were not yet to be born, our grandchildren, all future generations to follow, for the fight and sacrifice they did by destroying the Nazi tyranny. With that, they gave us back our lives. This is what Memorial Day is about. That's why we're remembering them. That's why we honor the grave sites of those who fell. Here's another one. Roddy Edmonds was a U.S. Army Master Sergeant from Tennessee who fought in World War II. At the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, Roddy and 1,000 of his men were captured by the Nazis and sent to Stalag 9A POW camp. This is written in the Accidental Talmud in 2015. When they arrived, the camp commander ordered Roddy to separate out the Jewish soldiers. Roddy knew that if he did so, the Jews would most likely be sent to death camps. Thinking fast, Roddy told his men that they would not obey the order. He turned to the commander and said, "We are all Jews here." Furious, the Nazi officer took out his pistol and threatened to shoot Roddy. "They cannot all be Jews," he said, insisting again that Roddy identify the Jewish soldiers. Even with a gun to his head, Roddy did not back down. "We are all Jews," he repeated. "If you shoot me, you'll have to shoot all of us, and after the war, you'll be tried for war crimes." The Nazi backed down, and the 200 Jewish soldiers in the group remained with their comrades until they were liberated. Okay, this is just the rest of the story. Incredibly, Roddy never told anybody about his wartime heroism. It wasn't until long after Roddy's death in 1985 that the story came out. His children, curious about their father's wartime experiences, started reading the diary he'd kept in Stalag 9A. Mostly it contained the names and addresses of soldiers under his command. Roddy's son Chris started searching the names online and found an old article about Lester Tanner, who became a prominent lawyer in New York. In the article, Tanner said that he and many other Jewish soldiers owed their lives to Sergeant Roddy Edmonds. Amazed, Chris contacted other soldiers from Roddy's unit and pieced together the story of his father's stubborn heroism. 2 weeks ago, Roddy Edmonds was honored by the Israeli Holocaust Memorial Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. He saved 200 of his Jewish brothers and sisters. Isn't that amazing?
It is, yes.
26,000 non-Jews who saved Jews during the Holocaust have been so honored, but Sergeant Roddy Edmonds is the only U.S. serviceman on the list. His name will be engraved on a wall at Vad Yasham in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. For bravely defying the orders of a Nazi officer to protect the Jewish soldiers in his care, we honor Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds as this week's Thursday hero at the Accidental Talmudist. Isn't that amazing? These are American soldiers. This is why we're celebrating Memorial Day. But it gets better. So, monuments to the USA soldiers exist everywhere in the world. You can't find monuments to Russian soldiers. You can't find monuments to German soldiers. You can't find monuments to Romans or any other group, right? But everywhere in the world, and this is why the New King James Version, greater love has no one than this, that to lay down one's life for his friends. I know, my father was in World War II. He knew what he was doing. He didn't just join the war to get a paycheck. He joined because he really believed in fighting for the sake of liberty, right? No group in human history has done more saving of human life than the U.S. military. And I'll show you those reasons, right? These are cemeteries all over the world for American soldiers. And one thing you'll notice, there's crosses on almost every one. There's some Stars of David, but mostly crosses on every one. This is Grenada. Remember that little island in Atlantic? They have a memorial. The West Indian Islands version of Thanksgiving would not exist without the United States. Held on October 25th every year, Grenada's Thanksgiving marks the anniversary of the 1983 U.S. military invasion to restore order after the death of communist leader Maurice Bishop and the invasion of the Cuban military to take over the country. American soldiers who were stationed in the country the following month told locals about their upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, its signature feast, and its intention to focus on gratitude. To show their own gratitude, the people of Grenada worked in secret to surprise the soldiers with meals like those they longed for, complete with turkey and the fixings. Today is celebrated in formal ceremonies of remembrance and memorial for the Americans who saved their lives, right? How about the Philippines? Philippines has these statues and memorials. The landing of Leyte was significant because this marked the start of the campaign to liberate the Philippines from the Japanese in World War II. My uncles were Filipinos. They remember this, right? Tacloban was the first city to be liberated by the United States, and Filipino forces became the temporary capital for several months. So they have a statue. This is made by the Filipinos to honor the soldiers that came to save them. How about Belgium? A multinational ceremony, part solemn remembrance of World War II and part celebration of decades-old alliances, marked the 60th anniversary of the Marzan Memorial, June 16th, near Bastogne, Belgium. The memorial honors the sacrifices of more than 75,000 U.S. soldiers who were wounded or killed during the Battle of the Bulge, the deadliest battle in U.S. Army history. As we ponder the threats we face today, we cannot help but think back to the sacrifices that were made here in Belgium and in this part of the world, he said in his remarks. The Marzan Memorial stands as a tribute to the past, a daily reminder of a modern-day partnership, and as a lesson to those who came after us. So, every year on Memorial Day, same as us, these are Belgian soldiers who come to honor Americans who lost their lives at this time. Scripted in the memorial stone at the center of the monument is a Latin phrase meaning the Belgian people remember American liberators, 4th of July, 1946. So again, these are everywhere. This is the Netherlands. This is the Netherlands Cemetery Memorial for American Soldiers. It's just beautiful. Thousands of Americans are buried there. And so they do this, and they have this celebration. They do this memorial every year. How about France? France has this a memorial for American soldiers who died liberating France. 42.5-acre Asny-Marne Cemetery Memorial in France. Its headstones lie in a sweeping curve, sits at the foot of a hill where stands Belleau Wood. The cemetery contains the graves of 2,289 war dead, most of whom fought in the vicinity of the Marne Valley in the summer of 1918. So all over the world, There are memorials honoring, respecting, loving the saviors of their nations called the American soldiers. How about this one? This is the 40.5-acre World War I cemetery about 24 miles southwest of Metz. This is a different cemetery with 4,153 of U.S. military dead. It's third largest of the 8 World War American military cemetery memorials in Europe. So France was like this. I'm going to show you some about Vietnam as well, because even in Vietnam there are memorials. In August 1942, as he was campaigning for the U.S. Senate, John F. Kennedy addressed the Massachusetts chapter of the American Federation of Labor. This manuscript is a draft of the speech Kennedy delivered before the influential labor union. Kennedy focused on the expansion of communism and the priority of containment. Kennedy referred to the communist threat as an enemy, powerful, unrelenting, and implacable, who seeks to dominate the world by subversion and conspiracy. And even by that time, even by the 60s, millions of people had been killed by the communists. After the fall of World War II, the Eastern Bloc nations all fell to communism. You need to read about Romania and Poland and all those places where Christians were systematically killed, murdered, and tortured to death. Who seeks to dominate the world by subversion and conspiracy. He asserted that all problems are dwarfed by the necessity of the West to maintain against the communists a balance of power. He also pointed out that the containment was necessary not only for the United States military safety, but also because of the threat communists posed in political and economic spheres. So, Kennedy's the one who involved us in Vietnam. This was his meaning. This is why he was doing it, right? This is what initiated our protection of South. It didn't work, but at least he tried. And Vietnamese refugees create monuments for it. So even Vietnamese are creating monuments for American soldiers, right? There's this lady, nearly 3 years ago, Thai Cavanaro set off on a mission. Find every Vietnam War veteran in Margaret and thank him for his service. Without them, she says, she would not have survived. Cavanaro's family fled Saigon on April 30, 1975, hours before the communist forces captured the South Vietnamese capital and took refuge in the United States. She was a little over 1 year old at the time, right? Cavanero, now 44, of Barnegat, gave thanks to hundreds of Vietnam veterans last Thursday, unveiling what may be the country's first Vietnam Veterans Monument created by Vietnamese themselves, by Vietnamese refugees themselves. She says, you helped keep communists away from our neighborhoods in Vietnam. She told hundreds of veterans and supporters at Gazebo Park in Barnegat. And you made sure we had a safe passage to your own country when we lost ours, right? Wearing long yellow and red dress designed like the South Vietnamese flag, Cavanero lifted the white cover and revealed a 21 by 20-inch black plaque which she and her husband James purchased. In large white letters, the monument said, welcome home, right? This is what she made. And she invited veterans from all over, Vietnam veterans all over. We love you, welcome home. Presented in gratitude by the Vietnamese community in New Jersey. Why? Because they understood they were saved, right? And these are American veterans who appreciated the gratitude she gave to them. Isn't that amazing? A Vietnamese refugee tells a story rescued by the U.S. Navy leading to military service. And this is a Vietnamese person who was rescued by a boat, by the boat people, right? Oops. Panelists for the symposium included former Vietnamese refugee Lieutenant Colonel Lan de Lata and 2 veterans of the USS Ranger who rescued 138 Vietnamese refugees on a boat in March 1981. Lan de Lata was 13 years old and living in war-torn communist Vietnam when his parents decided to risk everything and flee the country in 1981. Facing a possible capture by the Vietnamese or worse, death, the Lat's family boarded a wooden fishing boat with 137 other refugees seeking a new life. The boat, designed to carry just 25 people, drifted at sea for nearly 2 weeks. The group went days without food or water. On the horizon, we saw a metal floating city, said Delat. We couldn't believe it. The floating city turned out to be the USS Ranger CV-61 aircraft carrier. The crew rescued all 138 people aboard the tiny fishing vessel that was stranded hopelessly in the South China Sea. So was he grateful? Yeah, actually the story says not only did he become an American soldier, but his 3 sons also became American soldiers. And they're absolutely dedicated to America. Right? Who else is grateful? True Mother is grateful, right? This is from True Mother's autobiography about her experience with North Korean communists, Japanese, etc. Here's what she said. It was the autumn of 1948, and we left our home in the middle of the night. My mother carrying me on her back and my grandmother carrying a couple of bundles. It is quite a distance from Anju to the 38th parallel, 200 kilometers, about 125 miles as a crow flies, for two old ladies and a 6-year-old little girl.
Walking to LA.
125 miles, yeah, it's like walking to Pasadena, a little north of just the boundaries of LA. And we say no one has been more grateful to the United States Armed Forces than Reverend and Mrs. Boone. In Mother's autobiography, she escaped North Korea into the safety of the Americans. She says a soldier met her. This is not her. We don't think it's her. But this could have been her. And Americans could have been giving her something to eat, taking care of her, right? Once she came to the American side of the 38th parallel, she's safe and has been safe ever since. The communists had plowed the fields and broken up the shoulders of roads to make such a journey even more difficult. Our feet sank into mud as we walked through the fields, and we shivered all over with the cold. Still, we continued on, looking only at the starlight. North Korean People's Army soldiers were blocking the 38th parallel, and they easily captured my mother, grandmother, and me. They locked us up in a shed together with other frightened people who had the same intentions we did. The soldiers were rough with the men, but they did not treat women and children harshly. One day, one of the adults asked me to take food to the soldiers standing watch. Though my heart trembled inside, I forced a smile and handed the food to the soldiers. After I had done so several times, the soldiers' hearts softened, and one night they set my family free. They instructed us to return to our hometown, and we walked out of their sight in that direction. And then, as we stood at the crossroads between life and death, night fell and we waited, and heaven sent a young man to guide us on the path of life. Under cover of darkness, we followed him across the 38th parallel. Who is that guy? Amazing person, right? Whoever he is, I'm sure he's in heaven. As we crossed, I was so happy that I said to my mother, we don't have to sing songs praising Kim Il-sung anymore, do we? I will sing a song from the southern part of Korea. This too was God's intervention, for on the South Korean side, soldiers also were keeping a strict watch. I sang a few lines of the song with a joyous heart. At that moment, we heard a rustling in the bushes in front of us. We were surprised and stood frozen in place, fearful that we'd be captured by North Korean soldiers once again. Soldiers emerged from the bushes, South Koreans. At the sight of them, we almost wilted in relief. Those South Korean soldiers told us that they had heard us as we approached and had been about to fire upon us. But what did they hear? A little girl singing a South Korean song. When they heard the voice of a child singing, they had lowered their weapons. They welcomed us and comforted us. One soldier said, it must have been difficult for you to make it all the way here with this beautiful young child. This isn't much, but please take it. We were so grateful to this soldier whom God moved to give us money, enough to get us to Seoul. Looking back, if I had not sung at that moment, those young soldiers probably would have mistaken us for North Korean soldiers and shot us dead. In this way, once again, God protected us. We arrived safely in South Korea after undergoing hardships such as these. Yet in making the journey, we parted from my grandfather, whom we never saw again. Again, why were they safe in South Korea? Because the American military was there. It wasn't the South military. And again, this is just a picture of American soldier giving some food or something to Korean little girls, and that's who Americans are, right? So that brings Korean gratitude for the soldiers of the United States of America. The Korean War began on June 25th, 1950, when some 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean People's Army poured across the 38th parallel. This invasion was the first military action of the Cold War. Grateful South Koreans marked their war anniversary. From the bombed-out ruins of the 1950s, South Korea has soared in recent decades to become today's high-tech, trend-setting powerhouse, the world's 13th largest economy. This summer, South Korea marks the 65th anniversary of the July 27, 1953 armistice that brought a ceasefire but no peace treaty, leaving the Koreans technically still at war today. But at peace, why? Because the American umbrella. Many South Koreans are quick to express gratitude for the United States' help in repelling North Korean and Chinese forces. Unlike in the United States, the war is far from forgotten here. However, there is widespread concern that younger generations fail to grasp how important the war is to their freedoms and way of life, and how the enemy then remains on the border today in the form of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, son of dictator Kim Jong-il and grandson of dictator Kim Il-sung. Between Mao, Pol Pot, Kim Il-sung, millions upon millions upon millions of people were tortured to death, and they understand that, right? Without America, everything would belong to North Korea, says Bayun 54, who fondly recalls U.S. post-war food support. There would be no food, no life. We would be stuck in one country without communication with the outside world, he says. But in South Korea, we love freedom and democracy. That's why we can develop so much. And this was at the American Memorial a couple years ago. And then this is what happened. This is what he's saying. Here's North Korea. And this is from a satellite at night. South Korea is rich, has energy, has lights, has manufacturing, has food, has everything. North Koreans are still starving to death. That's what he said. Without American help, South Korea would be the same as this, even worse off, right? But South Korea united with the United States, so did Japan, so did Taiwan, and they become some of the richest countries in the whole world. Isn't that good? Isn't that good of America? So this is the Korean Memorial in Washington, D.C., the memorial for the Korean War in Washington, D.C. And this is the president of Korea, who came a couple years ago. South Korea President Moon Jae-in participates in a wreath-laying ceremony at the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. And here's what he has to say. South Korean President Moon Jae-in brought it with him to the U.S. last week his mother's vivid memory of her rescue by the Americans, what is often called the Forgotten War on the Peninsula. Isn't that a word that goes with the American military? Rescue, rescuers, saviors. This word seems to come from all over the world from people coming to the United States. Moon's mother, Kang Han-ok, was one of the 14,000 refugees fleeing the horrific battle at the Chosin Reservoir, what is now North Korea, who had crammed aboard the USS Meredith Victory, the ship of miracles. So the Americans had sent ships to bring back the 1st Division, U.S. Marines, and the 10th Army Division. But they also brought back tens of thousands, over 108,000 North Koreans who were trying to escape North Korea. So according to my mother, who is now 90 years old, on the 24th of December 1950, halfway through the voyage, American soldiers handed out a candy droplet to each refugee on board as Christmas presents. I believe this story has not yet been told, Moon said. Although it was but one droplet, I will always be grateful to U.S. service members with such caring hearts for giving Christmas presents to so many refugees in the middle of a devastating war. Moon said through a translator in a moving ceremony last Wednesday at the National Museum of Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Isn't that amazing? So this is the president of Korea thanking who? The American soldiers for taking care of his mother. Again, no one has been more grateful to the U.S. Armed Forces than Reverend Mrs. Moon. In Mother Moon's autobiography, she has kept North Korea into the safety of the Americans. Right? A few years ago, I'm sure Caroline was there. She's probably in charge of all this. Little Angels Children's Folk Ballet of Korea honored the Korean War 60th anniversary at Arlington National Cemetery. Right? And also they came to San Diego. We got to visit with the Little Angels and see them and see Colonel Reverend Pock. This was at the Marine Corps base at Camp Pendleton. We got to go there, and this is the Marine Corps' memorial for their work at the Chosin Reservoir. That's at Camp Pendleton now. You notice John Kenny had a lot of hair then. Anyhow, so then they came, and this is our own San Diego group meeting with them. We brought lots and lots of soldiers and veterans from Pendleton and all over, and they really appreciated us. Here's the Enyart family and Katrine and Pastor Frank and many other brothers and sisters who came to that program, and it was a very successful program. And here they are. Here it is again. This is Siyapa and their kids, Israel and David, Lucas. And here's all the other family members. Here's Alex and his group and different brothers and sisters. And we had a great time with them. It was fabulously successful. And it was because Father wanted to just thank the American soldiers. You saved our lives. God bless you and thank you. So, that's not the end of what Americans are doing. Today, so what does it mean to the world today? Today, the United States is party to several mutual defense treaties. The most prominent is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization called NATO, which obligates members to consider an attack on one as an attack on all. We believe this is why there's been no war in Europe for the last 70 years. There have been small, Ukraine and Russia, because Ukraine's not a member of NATO. That's the problem. So, and by the way, under President Reagan, Pope John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher, Lech Walesa, and Reverend Moon's Washington Times, freedom for millions of people in the Eastern Bloc happened with the fall of the Soviet Union. That happened because the American military was there. Without them, they would have attacked France and Russia just like the Nazis did. So we think the American military is a force for peace, not only rescuing people in the past, but rescuing people in the earth. Because of this, because of them, millions of people, the Romanians, the Polish people, all liberated from the clutch of the Soviet Union. Also, the United States is part of several mutual defense treaties. The most prominent is the North Atlantic Treaty. We did that one already. Additionally, the United States has bilateral mutual defense treaties with Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and Australia. That's why there's no war in Asia. And this is saving literally millions of lives in Asia. There are 50 million South Koreans who are alive today because of the American military. And if they had taken, the communists had taken Korea, next would be Japan, next would be Taiwan or Formosa, etc., etc. But because of this, then what do we have? The result is peace for millions of Asians and peace basically for the whole world. So we thank God for them. On the other hand, you would read, and people think this, Isaiah 2:4, they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Their nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And this is a really important part. Why don't we hammer our aircraft carriers into plowshares and pruning hooks and things like that? Because you can't do this without the free will of Cain freely agreeing to not attack Abel. And that hasn't happened. On the other hand, this is what true parents are doing, right? This is what true parents are doing by bringing together all kinds of religions, leaders, politicians from all over the world to come to Chunwon-gung, pray together. I was so amazed by this. This has been my heart's desire since I was a little boy. And when I was in the Catholic Church, they all said, well, Protestants are going to hell and only Catholics will be alive and a few people will go up into heaven. I couldn't stand that idea. I thought if we don't bring everybody together to love each other, there's no hope. I don't want to go to heaven and all my friends and family members are going to hell. That's not heaven. So what Mother's doing is bringing together all kinds of religions and people to pray together, talk together, see each other, be together, and realize that we're one family under God. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they make war and more. When the spirit of mankind matures, right? There cannot be peace until Cain nature is overcome by a mature nature of God's truth. We are all one family. It's better to compete in manufacturing, art, sports than in war. Isn't that amazing? That's what true parents have been preaching for the last 60 years, and that's what Mother is trying to do. We're bringing every race, every religion to talk peace, right? If we get enough peaceful people together, then the Cain people can't win. But you have to get enough peaceful people to outnumber the Cain side to such a point where Cain realizes, I should just give up and be nice, right? That's literally what true parents are doing. So I appreciate true parents. Also, during this tour, the little angels went all over the world, not just to the United States. They went to many other nations that participated, to all 16 nations that participated in saving the Koreans, right? And here's one other place they went. You might remember this. See, that I think this is New Zealand or Australia and different countries. Anyhow, they also went to Spirit World. Father also sent them to Spirit World. Remember in 2012, he sent Little Angels Korean folk dance group all around the world to thank the U.S. Armed Forces for their part in saving himself in Korea, and also the world from world Christianity. And not just to thank those still physically alive, but to call the spirits of those who had passed. Remember that? I remember that because I had Marines, Marine guests were there, and they said, they wrote us letters, and I should have put them on here. I apologize for that. But they said, yeah, we can see my father who was a Marine who died in Korea. We can see him seeing this in heaven and being happy. Isn't that amazing? The Marines could see it. So, also, Father did the ascension ceremony for Korean sailors. We think surely Jesus and true parents are raising an army in the spirit world from the men and women who gave their lives sacrificing for others. Don't you think? John says, greater love has no one than this, than they lay down one's life for his friends. No group in human history has done saving of human life in the world than the U.S. military. And so we can show you the numbers. We can show you the places. We can show you monuments all over the world in almost every country where they say thank you to the American soldier for dying to liberate us. Right? John 5:24, very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Very truly I tell you, a time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. I believe Christ is sending his angels and people to spirit world to bring all our soldiers who sacrifice their life into the kingdom of heaven to be with them in the spirit world. Right? For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself, and he has given to him authority to judge because he is the Son of Man. This is the last one. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them into living fountains of waters, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So I believe, yes, it's Memorial Day, but God is saving our memorial, our brothers and sisters, our men and women, our uncles and aunties who died during all these conflicts to save others. I believe Christ, God, true parents are going to save them, resurrect them to live in the kingdom of heaven. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.